The dust over the Afghan province of Helmand had not settled for 48 hours. For the men of an East Coast base SEAL team, operating out of a remote forward operating base nestled between two dry riverbeds, the color of the world had become a single shade of brutal beige. They had been running a series of clearance operations in a valley known locally as the Bone Yard, a stretch of villages where every compound wall hid a possible tunnel and every rooftop could conceal a man with a rusty PKM machine gun. The mission was standard: locate a high-value facilitator moving weapons from the Pakistani border. But no standard mission ever survives contact with the enemy. The explosion came at 13:47 hours, a hammer-blow of pressure and heat that seemed to lift the entire world sideways. A convoy of 3 up-armored Humvees had been rolling along a narrow track when the lead vehicle struck a command-detonated IED. The blast was not enormous, but it was surgical designed not to flip the truck, but to shred its tires and punch through the floor. Inside, 4 operators took the brunt, shrapnel to the legs, feet, and lower abdomens. Within seconds, the call went out over the tactical net: man down, man down. Multiple casualties. Request immediate medical support. Chief Marcus Webb, the team's lead medic, was 2 vehicles back. He had been a combat medic for 12 years, first in the Army, then as a civilian contractor before earning his trident. He had seen blown-off limbs, sucking chest wounds, and a man whose face had been partially deglobed by an RPG. Marcus did not flinch anymore. He flinched less than most surgeons. But when he reached the smoking Humvee and saw the blood black-red and pooling fast into the dirt, his throat tightened. 3 of his men were mobile but leaking. The 4th, a young petty officer named Diaz, was pinned in the passenger seat, a piece of shrapnel the size of a butter knife lodged deep in his upper thigh, nicking the femoral artery. Diaz's face was the color of wet paper. Tourniquet, now, Marcus yelled, already tearing open his aid bag. He applied the windlass to Diaz's leg, twisted until the bleeding slowed, then turned to the others. It was controlled chaos, the kind of chaos that good medics learn to ride like a wave. By the time the medevac bird was 10 minutes out, Marcus had stabilized all 4. He was breathing hard, sweat mixing with dust to form a gritty paste on his neck. That was when one of the younger SEALs, a man named Kowalski, grabbed his arm. "Chief, there's someone in the ditch, back by the blast crater. I thought she was dead, but I just saw her move." Marcus's first instinct was tactical. The area could still be hot. A secondary device was always a possibility. But the rules were clear. You do not leave a non-combatant to bleed out if you have the means to help. He grabbed a second aid bag and followed Kowalski 50 meters down the slope, where the IED had torn a shallow trench into the earth. Lying face down, half covered in debris, was a woman. She was not wearing a burqa or the loose shalwar kameez of the local women. Instead, she had on a dusty olive-green tactical vest over a dark long-sleeve shirt, and her trousers were cargo-style, reinforced at the knees. Her boots were proper desert boots, worn but serviceable. Her dark hair was chopped short, unevenly, as if she had done it with a knife. She was curled on her side, and the entire left side of her vest was wet with blood. Marcus rolled her over gently. She was conscious but fading. Her eyes a startling, deep brown found his face and held it. She did not cry out. She did not beg. Her jaw was set, and her right hand was clamped over a wound just below her ribcage on the left side. When Marcus moved her hand to assess the damage, she hissed but did not scream. The wound was a puncture, likely from a piece of the IED's casing. It had entered just above her hip and tracked upward, possibly nicking the spleen or the left kidney. The bleeding was steady, dark venous blood with occasional spurts of brighter red. She was bleeding internally as well as externally. "Can you hear me?" Marcus asked, already packing the wound with combat gauze. "Stay with me. What's your name?" She swallowed. Her voice was a dry whisper, but it carried an accent he could not immediately place. "Samira, I'm not a civilian." Marcus paused for a fraction of a second. That was not unusual. Local interpreters, aid workers, even journalists sometimes wore vests. But her hands told a different story. They were calloused in specific places, the web between thumb and index finger, the pads of her knuckles. These were the hands of someone who had spent years gripping a weapon. He glanced at her waist. Hidden beneath the flap of her vest was a worn leather holster, empty. The weapon had been blown away in the blast. But the holster was not the kind issued to interpreters. It was a custom piece, molded for a specific pistol, likely a Sig Sauer or a Glock. "Who are you?" Marcus asked again, packing the wound more firmly. The medevac was 9 minutes out. He needed to decide. Did they take her? The bird had space for 2 additional casualties if they stacked them tight. But protocol was blurry. Non-DOD personnel were not automatically entitled to coalition medical evacuation unless they were actively supporting the mission. Samira's eyes fluttered. She was losing the fight. Her blood pressure was dropping. Marcus could see it in the way her lips lost color, the way her breathing became shallow and rapid. He made a decision that could get him court-martialed. He lifted her in his arms. She weighed nothing, maybe 120 pounds, most of it lean muscle. As he carried her toward the landing zone, she mumbled something against his shoulder. He had to lean in too here. "Tell them," she whispered, "the bleeding is my 3rd worst injury today. I'll walk it off." Marcus laughed despite himself. That kind of dark humor was not civilian. That was operator humor. That was the kind of thing a person said when they had been shot before, blown up before, and had kept moving. He laid her on the stretcher next to Diaz and began an for push of tranexamic acid to slow the internal bleeding. The flight medic on the Black Hawk looked at Marcus with raised eyebrows when he saw the woman. "Local national." The flight medic shouted over the rotor noise. "Don't know yet," Marcus shouted back. "But she's coming with us. Keep her systolic above 90. If she codes, you call it." The flight medic nodded. He had learned not to question SEAL medics. They flew low and fast, hugging the terrain to avoid enemy fire. Samira's eyes remained open for the entire flight. She did not look at the ceiling or cry. She stared at the forebag, watching the fluid drip as if calculating its rate. When the bird touched down at the forward surgical team's tent, 2 surgeons and 3 nurses working miracles in a sand-colored inflatable, Samira was still conscious. She refused morphine. She told the nurse, "I need to keep my head clear." Asked the chief to stay. Marcus stayed. He held her hand while the surgeon probed the wound, located the damaged spleen, and made the call. "She's going to the OR. We're removing it." Samira looked at Marcus and said something he would never forget. "Don't let them take my dog tags." Marcus looked down. Beneath her vest, hanging from a simple ball chain, were 2 metal tags. They were not American. They were not British, Canadian, or Australian. The shape was different, thicker, with a different font for the name and service number. Marcus recognized them because he had seen a set once before, years ago, in a joint training exercise. He felt the air leave his lungs. The tags belonged to the Kurdish Peshmerga. She was a frontline combat medic. 2 hours later, Marcus Webb sat outside the operating tent on an overturned ammo crate, drinking water that tasted like warm plastic. The Afghan night had fallen hard and cold, and the base's perimeter lights cast long shadows across the gravel. He had handed off his other patients to the surgical team. Diaz's leg was saved. The others were already texting their families through the satellite link. But Samira, the woman with the Peshmerga tags, remained in surgery. The spleen came out easily enough. The challenge was a small tear in her diaphragm caused by the blast wave itself. The surgeon, a sharp-eyed lieutenant commander from Georgia, had closed the tear and was now checking for intestinal damage. Marcus knew the odds. A splenectomy was survivable, even in a field hospital. But internal injuries from an IED had a way of turning fatal 48 hours later. When no one was looking, he was not supposed to care this much. He had seen death. He had failed to save friends. The rule among combat medics was simple: you do your best, and then you let go. But Samira had gotten under his skin. It was not her courage, though that was undeniable. It was the way she had refused to be a victim. Even as she bled out, she had been assessing him, testing him, deciding whether he was competent enough to keep her alive. That was not the behavior of a rescued civilian. That was the behavior of a peer. The surgeon emerged an hour later, pulling off his gloves. "She's stable. Lost a lot of blood, but her clotting factors held. Strong woman. You know anything about her?" Marcus shook his head. "Not yet." "Did she say anything on the table?" The surgeon laughed tiredly. "She asked me if I had ever done a splenectomy on a left-handed shooter. I said no," she said. "Good. You won't be bored." Then she went under. "Who is she?" Marcus did not answer. He walked into the recovery tent, where Samira lay on a cot, connected to a single bag of saline and a chest tube to drain fluid from around her lung. Her eyes were closed, but her right hand was curled into a loose fist, resting on her stomach. She was not asleep. Her breathing was controlled. Marcus pulled up a stool and sat. "You can open your eyes," he said quietly. She did. "You stayed. I had questions." Samira smiled. It was a thin, tired smile, but it reached her eyes. "You want to know why a Kurdish woman was blown up on an Afghan road, wearing a vest and carrying an empty holster? That's a good start." She shifted slightly, winced, and then settled. The morphine had finally been administered against her objections, but she was fighting its effects with grim determination. "I'm not Afghan," she said. "I'm from northern Iraq, Rania, near the Iranian border. I was Peshmerga for 8 years. Medical corps. Then I worked with a private security company doing high-threat protection in Syria. After that, a UN contract in Libya. The Afghan job was supposed to be easy. Train local women in first aid. But the Taliban don't like women who can stitch wounds. They put a price on my head. $50,000 for my ears. A month ago, my driver turned out to be a spy. He drove me into an ambush near coast. I survived." He did not. Marcus listened without interrupting. He had heard stories like this before, but never from a woman. The private military world was full of ghosts, former special operators, intelligence officers, and mercenaries trading on skills that governments could not officially endorse. But a female Peshmerga medic turned security contractor was rare. Almost unheard of. "Why were you on that road today?" Marcus asked. "I was moving to a new safe house. The convoy I was traveling with stopped to help a broken-down truck. I got out to check for wounded. The IED was not meant for me. It was meant for the truck. Wrong place, wrong time. Not the first time. You were carrying a weapon I always carry. It was a Glock 19. It's somewhere in the dust now. Someone will find it and sell it for $100. Marcus leaned forward. "The tags. You still wear Peshmerga tags." Samira's hand moved to her chest, touching the metal through the thin hospital gown. "I earned them at Sinjar." "Do you know what happened at Sinjar?" Marcus did. In 2014, when ISIS swept through northern Iraq, tens of thousands of Yazidis fled to Mount Sinjar. They were surrounded, dying of thirst and hunger. The Peshmerga pulled back. But some stayed. Some fought. Some women took up rifles and defended their families. Samira had been one of them. She had spent 8 days on that mountain, treating wounds with nothing but water and torn cloth, carrying children down the slope under sniper fire. She had been shot in the left arm. The wound had healed into a thick, rope-like scar that Marcus had noticed when he first examined her. "You're not just a medic," Marcus said slowly. "You're a fighter." Samira looked at him with an expression that was half challenge, half exhaustion. "I'm a medic who fights. There's a difference. I don't kill to prove anything. I kill so I can keep treating. The day I can't do both is the day I hang up my tags." The tent flaps rustled. A nurse came in to check Samira's vitals, blood pressure improving, pulse steady. The nurse left. The silence between Marcus and Samira was comfortable. The kind of silence shared by people who have seen the same ugliness and chosen to keep going anyway. "The SEAL medics," Samira said finally. "They were stunned when they found out I wasn't a civilian." "Why?" "Because I bleed like one." Marcus shook his head. "Because you didn't act like one. A civilian would have screamed, would have begged, would have grabbed my arm and asked if they were going to die. You didn't do any of that. You asked me if I knew how to pack a wound properly. You corrected my technique." Samira laughed quietly, then winced again. "Your technique was fine. I just wanted to see if you had ego. Most men do. You don't. I've been doing this too long for ego. Good. Then you'll understand why I need you to do something for me." She reached under her pillow and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, a page torn from a notepad, covered in Dari script and a few lines of English. It was a list of names, 10 of them, women, girls, some as young as 14. "These are my trainees," Samira said. "Local Afghans I was teaching battlefield medicine. After the ambush, they scattered. Some are hiding in a village called Tangi Valley, 20 miles north of here. The Taliban knows about them. They will kill them if they find them. I need you to get them out." Marcus stared at the list. He was a SEAL medic, not a rescue coordinator. His job was to patch holes, not to extract endangered civilians from hostile territory. But the names on the paper were written in a careful, precise hand. Each one had a note next to it. Fatima a broken leg, no caste. Zara, pregnant, 7 months. Layla, only 15, good with rifle. Why me? Marcus asked. Because you stayed, Samira said simply. And because you looked at me and saw a medic, not a woman. That's rare. That's why I trust you. Marcus folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He did not promise anything. He did not say yes. But he stood up, adjusted his cap, and looked down at the woman who had bled into his hands and then thanked him for his technique. He thought about the Medic's code, the one that says you save the life in front of you, no matter where they come from or what flag they fly. That code did not end at the operating table. It ended when the person was safe. Rest, he told Samira. I'll see what I can do. She closed her eyes. Her hand remained on her dog tags. Outside, the Afghan wind began to rise, carrying the distant sound of gunfire from the mountains. Marcus walked back to his unit's quarters, pulled out a map, and began marking the route to Tangi Valley. He did not know yet that the mission to save 10 women would cost him 2 of his own men. He did not know that Samira would leave her hospital bed 3 days early, steal a rifle from the armory, and demand to go with him. He did not know that the Taliban had already reached the village, and that the youngest girl on the list, Layla, 15, had used her training to save her own life by applying a tourniquet to her older sister's leg after a bullet tore through it. But Marcus knew one thing for certain. The woman bleeding in the recovery tent was not a victim. She was not a civilian. She was a brother in arms, even if she wore different tags. And brothers in arms did not leave each other behind. He unsheathed his knife and scratched a small marking on the wall above his cot, the letter S. For Samira, and under it, a single word, unshaken, because that was what she was. Bleeding, broken, cracked open by war, but unshaken. And that, more than any medal or rank, was the truest thing he had ever seen in a combat zone.